The auction block was a peculiar thing to stand on in the year 1876, especially for a woman who'd once believed her life would amount to more than property. Olivia Sutton gripped her torn skirt with white knuckles as the Texas sun beat down mercilessly upon her bare head. Her auburn hair, once her pride, hung in tangled waves around her hollow cheeks. The men who gathered before her in the dusty square of San Antonio, Texas, were a blur of weathered faces and hungry eyes. "This one's educated," the auctioneer announced, as if her ability to read and write was a novelty to be advertised. "Can keep your books, mend your clothes, and warm your bed. Starting bid is $40. Olivia wanted to scream, to remind them all that the Civil War had ended over a decade ago, that slavery was abolished, that this bride auction was nothing but a thinly veiled atrocity. But desperation had many faces in the West, and hers was just one of them. After her father's death left her with nothing but debts, and the bank seized their homestead in Missouri, she'd fallen prey to a smooth-talking man who promised her work in Texas. That work, it seemed, was standing on this platform while men bid for her like cattle. The bidding was quick and ruthless, $50, $65, $70. She kept her eyes fixed on a distant point, refusing to look at the men who sought to own her. When the gavel finally struck at $90, Olivia felt her heart stop. "Sold to Mr. Zachary in the back." The auctioneer announced with grotesque cheer. The crowd parted as her buyer stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face as hard as the Texas landscape. His dark hair was flecked with silver at the temples, and a beard obscured much of his expression. But his eyes, piercing blue and cold as ice, regarded her with an intensity that made her shiver despite the heat. Thomas Zachary. She'd heard whispers of him while waiting in the holding pen with the other women. The hermit rancher, the man who never spoke. Some said he'd been mute since birth, others that he'd lost his voice to injury or grief. Whatever the truth, he was now her owner, and terror gripped her as he approached. He didn't speak, not to the auctioneer, not to the men who clapped his shoulder in congratulation. He merely handed over the money, took the paper that declared her his property, and gestured for her to follow him. Olivia's legs trembled as she stepped down from the platform. "Sir, please," she whispered, even knowing it was futile. "I'm not meant to be sold. This isn't legal." His eyes flicked to her face, then away. No acknowledgement, no response. He led her to a wagon at the edge of town loaded with supplies. Without ceremony, he pointed to the passenger seat. Olivia climbed up, heart pounding. As they pulled away from San Antonio, she watched the town recede, wondering if she'd ever see civilization again. They traveled in silence for hours. The landscape grew wilder, more desolate. Scrub brush and cacti dotted the plains, and distant mesas rose like sentinels against the endless blue sky. Olivia's fear evolved into a simmering anger. "Do you intend to tell me anything about where we're going?" she finally asked, her voice cracking from thirst and disuse. Thomas Zachary didn't even turn his head. His hands, scarred and calloused, held the reins with practiced ease. His profile, silhouetted against the setting sun, remained impassive. "You've purchased a person," she continued, emboldened by his silence. "The least you could do is acknowledge that I can speak, even if you cannot." Still nothing. Not a nod, not a gesture, just the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the creaking of the wagon wheels. By the time they arrived at his ranch, night had fallen. In the moonlight, Olivia could make out a modest house, a barn, and several outbuildings. No neighbors in sight, no sound but the wind rustling through the mesquite trees. Thomas climbed down from the wagon and came around to her side. When she didn't move, he held out his hand, not grabbing or forcing, simply offering assistance. Reluctantly, she took it and descended. He led her to the house, lit a lamp, and showed her a small bedroom at the back. It was clean but spare: a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a pitcher and basin. He pointed at the bed, then at her, his meaning clear. This was her space. Before he could leave, Olivia gathered her courage. "Mr. Zachary," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to know what you expect of me. Why did you buy me?" For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, not desire or cruelty, but something more complex. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small slate and piece of chalk. On it he wrote in neat, precise letters, "Housekeeper." Just that. One word that defined her purpose but did nothing to ease her fears. "And nothing else?" she asked, hating how her voice trembled. He shook his head once firmly, then erased the slate and wrote, "Rest now." He left the room, closing the door behind him, but Olivia noted with surprised relief, not locking it. She sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed in the tattered clothes she'd worn to the auction. Exhaustion washed over her, but sleep seemed impossible. She was at the mercy of a man who never spoke, miles from anywhere, with no money and nowhere to go. Yet as she looked around the small room, she realized it was the first time in months she'd had a space of her own. After her father's death, after the bank took their home, after the journey to Texas in the company of women as desperate as herself, this quiet room felt almost like a sanctuary. She washed her face and hands in the basin, noticing a clean nightgown folded at the foot of the bed. She changed quickly, half expecting the door to burst open at any moment, but the house remained silent. The bed, when she finally lay down, was surprisingly comfortable, the sheets smelling of lye soap and fresh air. Despite her fear and uncertainty, Olivia fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of someone who had reached the end of one life and stood at the threshold of another, for better or worse. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the scent of coffee. Olivia dressed hastily in her auction clothes, grimacing at their state, and cautiously made her way to the kitchen. Thomas Zachary stood at the stove, his back to her. He turned at her footsteps, nodding once in acknowledgement. The kitchen was unexpectedly welcoming: a large wooden table, a cast-iron stove, shelves of provisions, and windows that let in the golden morning light. On the table sat a plate of eggs, biscuits, and bacon, still steaming. Thomas gestured to the food, then to her. He'd already eaten, judging by the used plate near the sink. "Thank you," Olivia said, sitting down warily. The food was simple but well prepared, and hunger overcame her apprehension. As she ate, Thomas wrote on his slate, "After breakfast, we'll show you the ranch." She nodded, studying him in the daylight. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his mid-30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun. His clothes were clean and well-maintained, his manner composed. Nothing about him suggested violence or cruelty, yet she reminded herself that appearances could be deceiving. True to his word, after breakfast, Thomas led her on a tour of the ranch. It was larger than she'd realized in the darkness, 100 acres, at least, with a small herd of cattle, a vegetable garden, a chicken coop, and a spring-fed creek that provided water year-round. As they walked, he occasionally wrote on his slate, "Garden needs tending, or creek doesn't dry up, or chickens lay well." It was a functional place, obviously maintained by a solitary man who valued practicality over comfort. Yet there were touches that surprised her: wild roses growing by the front porch, a bench placed to catch the sunset, shelves of books visible through the parlor window. When they returned to the house, Thomas wrote, "Your duties: cooking, cleaning, laundry, garden." Then, after a pause, "Fair pay." Olivia blinked in surprise. "Pay? You're going to pay me?" He nodded, writing, $15 a month. Room and board included. It was a decent wage for a housekeeper, especially with room and board provided, but the arrangement still troubled her deeply. "Mr. Zachary," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "I appreciate the offer of fair employment, but you purchased me. You own a paper that says I belong to you. That's not employment, that's ownership." Something shifted in his expression. He wrote quickly, "Paper means nothing." "You are free to leave." "Leave to where?" Olivia gestured around them. "We're miles from anywhere. I have no money, no transportation." He considered this, then wrote, "We'll take you to town next supply run. 1 week." He hesitated, then added, "Or stay, work, earn money, your choice. A week." She could endure a week in this strange, silent place with this strange, silent man. And then she would have a choice: return to town with nothing but the clothes on her back, or remain here, working for wages that might eventually buy her true freedom. 1 week, she agreed. "And then I decide." He nodded once, satisfied, and wrote, "Need better clothes, follow me." In a storeroom off the kitchen, he unlocked a trunk and stepped back. Inside were women's clothes, dresses, skirts, blouses, all simple but well-made and surprisingly fashionable for ranch wear. Olivia looked at him in confusion. "These are," he wrote quickly, "my sister's. She died 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," Olivia said softly, understanding now why he might need a housekeeper. Did she live here with you?" He nodded, a shadow crossing his face. For the first time, Olivia saw grief in those blue eyes. "Take what you need," he wrote. "They do no good in a trunk." That evening, wearing a blue cotton dress that fit her reasonably well, Olivia cooked their first proper dinner, a stew with vegetables from the garden and meat from the smokehouse. Thomas ate appreciatively, and afterward, instead of retiring to his room, he gestured for her to join him in the small parlor. The parlor was the most personal room in the house. Bookshelves lined one wall, a stone fireplace occupied another, and 2 comfortable chairs faced each other across a small table. Thomas lit the lamp, then selected a book from the shelf and offered it to her. It was a volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Olivia took it with surprise. "You like poetry?" He nodded, selecting another book for himself, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. They read in companionable silence, the only sounds the turning of pages and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. It was strangely peaceful, this quiet evening ritual with a man who never spoke. As the days passed, Olivia fell into a routine. She rose early to prepare breakfast, spent the morning cleaning or working in the garden, prepared lunch, then devoted the afternoons to laundry or baking or mending. Thomas worked with the cattle or repaired fences or tended to the endless tasks a ranch required. They ate dinner together, then spent the evening reading or, occasionally, playing chess on a set Thomas produced from a cabinet. He was a solitary man, but not unkind. He wrote notes to her sparingly, communicating mostly through gestures and expressions that Olivia became increasingly adept at interpreting. A raised eyebrow might ask if dinner was ready, a nod toward the sky might warn of approaching rain. His silence was not hostile but habitual, as if speech was a muscle he'd long ago stopped exercising. On the 4th day, disaster struck. Olivia was hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from the corral. Thomas was attempting to break a new horse, a spirited Mustang he'd captured from a wild herd. The horse reared suddenly, throwing Thomas against the fence post with terrible force. He slumped to the ground, unconscious. Olivia dropped the laundry and ran to him, heart pounding. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, but he was breathing. The Mustang had broken free and galloped away, but that was the least of her concerns. With strength born of desperation, she managed to drag Thomas to the house and onto his bed. She cleaned the wound, which thankfully wasn't as deep as the blood had suggested, and bandaged his head. Then she waited, alternating between fear that he would die and awareness that if he did, she would be truly alone on this isolated ranch. He woke near sunset, his eyes confused at first, then focusing on her face with recognition. He tried to sit up but winced in pain. "Don't move," Olivia said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You took a bad fall." He reached for the slate that always hung at his belt, but it had broken in the fall. Instead, he mimicked writing in the air. "I'll find you paper," Olivia said, understanding his gesture. She located a pencil and an old ledger book in his desk. "Here, but don't strain yourself." "Thank you," he wrote shakily. "You're welcome. Now rest. I've made broth for when you feel able to eat." He caught her wrist as she turned to leave, his grip surprisingly gentle despite his strength. On the paper he wrote, "You could have left." Olivia paused, realizing the truth of it. With Thomas unconscious, she could have taken a horse and supplies and been miles away before he woke. The thought hadn't even occurred to her. "I couldn't leave you injured," she said simply. "That wouldn't be right." Something shifted in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or wonder. He wrote, "You are a good person." "I try to be," she replied softly. "Now rest. I'll check on you later." That night, as Olivia completed the evening chores alone, she reflected on her situation. The week was almost up. Soon, Thomas would take her to town as promised, and she would have to decide, stay or go. The decision had seemed obvious at first. Of course she would go, would reclaim her freedom and start anew, but now she wasn't so certain. There was peace here and purpose. Thomas treated her with respect, and the work, while demanding, was rewarding in its way. In town, what awaited her? No money, no references, no protector in a place where a woman alone was always vulnerable, and Thomas himself was becoming less of an enigma. His silence was not a void but a presence, like the spaces between musical notes. In his gestures, his written words, even in the books he chose to read, she was coming to know him a thoughtful man, intelligent and observant, wounded in some way she didn't yet understand. The next morning, Thomas was well enough to sit up, though the bruise on his temple had darkened to a vivid purple. Olivia brought him breakfast on a tray. "How are you feeling?" she asked, helping him arrange his pillows. "Sore," he wrote, "but better, thank you for care." "You should rest today," she advised. "The chores can wait." He shook his head, writing, "Cattle need checking, north pasture." "I'll go," Olivia offered impulsively. "Just tell me what to look for." He regarded her with surprise, then wrote detailed instructions about counting the herd, checking for signs of illness, and ensuring the water trough was full. At the bottom, he added, "Take rifle, know how to shoot, my father taught me," she said. Though in truth it had been years since she'd handled a firearm, Thomas nodded, still looking uncertain, but he wrote, "Be careful, back by noon." Olivia saddled the gentlest of Thomas's horses, a bay mare with a white star on her forehead. With the rifle secured in a scabbard and Thomas's instructions in her pocket, she rode north, following the trail he'd described. The morning was glorious, the vast Texas sky stretching endlessly above her, the land rolling away in waves of green and gold. For the first time since her father's death, Olivia felt a sense of freedom, of possibility. She imagined, briefly, riding on past the cattle, past the boundaries of Thomas's ranch, into a future of her own choosing, but she returned to the north pasture and methodically completed her tasks. The cattle were all present and healthy, 37 head as Thomas had indicated. The water trough needed refilling, which she managed with the pump Thomas had installed. As she was preparing to leave, a movement in the brush caught her attention. Instinctively, she reached for the rifle, but relaxed when she saw it was only a young calf, separated from its mother. She approached slowly, speaking in soothing tones, and managed to guide it back to the herd. By the time she returned to the ranch house, it was just past noon. Thomas was sitting on the porch, his face tight with worry despite his injuries. When he saw her, relief washed over his features. "Everything's fine," Olivia reported as she dismounted. "All 37 cattle accounted for, water trough filled, and I found a stray calf and reunited it with its mother." Thomas's eyes widened with something like admiration. He wrote quickly, "You did well. Thank you." Olivia found herself smiling, genuinely pleased by his approval. "It was actually rather enjoyable. I've never spent much time outdoors, but there's something liberating about it." He nodded in understanding, then wrote, "Tomorrow is town day. Still want to go?" The question caught her off guard. In the excitement of the morning, she'd nearly forgotten that tomorrow marked the end of her trial week. I'm not sure," she admitted. "May I think about it?" Thomas nodded, his expression carefully neutral, though Olivia thought she detected a hint of hope in his eyes. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, weighing her options, trying to discern her true desires beneath the layers of fear and obligation. By morning, she had made her decision. Thomas was already in the kitchen when she emerged, preparing the wagon for the trip to town. He looked at her questioningly. "I'd like to stay," Olivia said simply. "For now, at least, if your offer of employment still stands." The relief on his face was unmistakable. He nodded vigorously, then wrote, "Glad, need your help. Then, after a moment's hesitation, enjoy your company." It was the most personal statement he'd made, and Olivia felt a warmth spread through her chest at the admission. "I enjoy yours as well," she replied softly, "though I have questions about why you purchased me rather than simply advertising for a housekeeper." Thomas's expression darkened. He wrote at length, his pencil pressing hard against the paper, heard about auction. Knew IT was wrong, women being sold like cattle, couldn't stop IT all, could save one. Olivia read the words, then looked up at him in astonishment. "You weren't looking for a housekeeper, you were trying to help," He nodded, writing, "Sister would have wanted me to. She always said I should not be alone." "That's why you're willing to let me go," Olivia realized. "You never intended to keep me here against my will." "Never," he wrote emphatically. "Freedom is precious." Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier falling away, a new understanding taking root. Thomas was not her owner or even merely her employer. He was her rescuer, though he would never have described himself that way. "We should still go to town," Olivia suggested. "I can help with the supplies and perhaps you could open an account for me at the bank, for my wages." Thomas nodded, pleased by her practicality. They set off within the hour, the wagon loaded with items to sell eggs, butter, a calf ready for market. The journey was no less silent than their first trip together, but the silence was companionable now, punctuated by moments when Thomas would point out a hawk soaring overhead or a particularly beautiful vista. San Antonio was bustling when they arrived. Thomas conducted his business efficiently, selling his goods and purchasing supplies. At the bank, he opened an account in Olivia's name, depositing her first week's wages plus a bonus that made her eyes widen. "This is too much," she protested. "For nursing," he wrote, touching the still visible bruise on his temple. They were loading the last of the supplies when a commotion erupted down the street. A group of rough-looking men had surrounded a young woman who was backing away in terror. Olivia recognized her immediately. Sarah, one of the women who had been auctioned alongside her. Without thinking, Olivia started toward them, but Thomas caught her arm. His eyes asked a question. "That's Sarah," Olivia explained quickly. "She was sold the same day I was." "Those men, I don't know what they're doing, but it can't be good." Thomas's jaw tightened. He strode purposefully toward the group, Olivia hurrying to keep up. As they approached, they could hear the men's jeering. "Property's property," one was saying, "bought and paid for. Your husband lost his claim when he couldn't pay his gambling debts." Sarah was pressing herself against a wall, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she begged, "I just want to go home to my children." Thomas stepped between Sarah and the men, his imposing height and breadth creating an immediate barrier. The leader of the group, a rat-faced man with a scar across his cheek, sneered at him. "This ain't your business, mute. The woman belongs to my boss now." Thomas didn't move. His hand drifted to his belt, where Olivia knew he carried a hunting knife, though he didn't draw it. "Gentlemen," Olivia said, stepping forward despite her racing heart, "this auction business is illegal. The war ended more than 10 years ago. No one can own another person in the United States of America." The scarred man spat on the ground. "Tell that to the judge who signed the papers. These bride auctions are plenty legal when the women sign consent forms." "Consent forms they're forced to sign," Olivia countered, her voice growing stronger with righteous anger. "Under threat, under duress. Don't matter how they sign," the man growled. "Just matters that they did." He turned back to Thomas. "Last warning, step aside." In the tense silence that followed, something extraordinary happened. Thomas Zachary opened his mouth and spoke. "Then hear me say she's safe." His voice was rough from disuse, but clear and deep, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "And under my protection." The men froze in shock, as did Olivia. The scarred man recovered first, his hand moving toward his gun. "Your outnumbered friend." "Is he?" came a new voice. A man stepped out from the general store, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a sheriff's badge. "Seems to me you boys are causing a disturbance in my town." The scarred man's confidence wavered. "Sheriff Davis, we're just collecting property for I don't recall people being property in Texas these days," the sheriff interrupted coldly. "And I surely don't recall any legal bride auctions being sanctioned by proper authorities." He moved to stand beside Thomas. "Now, why don't you boys run along back to whatever rock you crawled out from under and tell your boss that Sheriff Davis said these auctions are done in San Antonio?" The men exchanged glances, calculating their odds. With visible reluctance, the scarred man backed away. "This ain't over," he muttered. "Oh, I think it is," the sheriff replied evenly. "Unless you'd like accommodations in my jail tonight." The men slunk away, casting venomous glances over their shoulders. Sarah collapsed against the wall in relief, and Olivia rushed to support her. Thank you, Sarah whispered, looking from Thomas to the sheriff. They've been following me for days. Where are your children? Olivia asked gently. With neighbors, my husband, Sarah's voice broke. He gambled away everything, then himself. When he couldn't pay, they took me instead, said I was collateral. The sheriff's expression hardened. I've been hearing rumors about these auctions for months, but this is the first time I've caught them in the act. Madam, would you be willing to make a formal statement? Might help us put a stop to this for good. Sarah nodded hesitantly. If it's safe. I'll see to it personally, the sheriff promised. Now let's get you somewhere secure and then we'll arrange to bring your children to town. As the sheriff led Sarah away, Olivia turned to Thomas in amazement. You spoke, she said, still hardly believing what she'd heard. Thomas cleared his throat as if the act of speech was physically painful after so long. Some things, worth speaking for, he said haltingly. Why? Olivia asked, gesturing to his throat. Why don't you usually speak? Thomas hesitated, then replied slowly, each word carefully formed. War. Confederate prison, they. He gestured to his neck, where Olivia now noticed a thin scar running along his throat. Damaged, hurts to speak. The Civil War had ended 11 years ago, which meant Thomas had lived in silence for more than a decade. But you can speak, she said softly. You just choose not to because it causes you pain. He nodded, then added with effort, easier, not to try, until today. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, understanding now the depth of his sacrifice, not just speaking to protect Sarah, but purchasing Olivia herself to save her from a worse fate. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. They completed their business in town quickly after that. The sheriff assured them he would investigate the auction ring and see Sarah and her children safely resettled. Thomas and Olivia headed back to the ranch as afternoon stretched toward evening, both quiet, each absorbed in their own thoughts. That night after dinner, Thomas handed Olivia a note he'd written with obvious care. I spoke today because someone needed protection. I bought you for the same reason. But I want you to stay because I enjoy your company. No obligation, your choice always. Olivia read it twice, feeling something shift and settle in her heart. I choose to stay, she said simply. Not out of obligation, but because I want to, this place. It feels like it could be home. Thomas's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and pain. He wrote, "It can be your home, for as long as you wish." As summer turned to fall, Olivia and Thomas settled into a comfortable routine. Her duties as housekeeper remained, but they evolved naturally into a partnership. She learned to ride better, to help with the cattle, to predict the weather by watching the sky. He began to speak occasionally, never much, and always with obvious effort, but enough that they could have simple conversations without his slate. Olivia's account at the bank grew steadily. She sent letters to her few remaining relatives, explaining her new situation in carefully chosen words. She purchased books and fabric and seeds for the garden. She began to think of the ranch not as Thomas's, but as theirs, a shared enterprise that flourished under their combined care. And gradually, inevitably, their relationship deepened beyond employer and employee, beyond friends, into something neither of them named but both felt with increasing certainty. It happened on an October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Thomas had been speaking more frequently, though never at length. He turned to her, his blue eyes reflecting the golden light. "Olivia," he said, her name soft on his lips, "need to tell you something." She set aside her mending, giving him her full attention. "I'm listening." He swallowed, visibly gathering his strength. "When Caroline, my sister, died, thought I'd be alone forever, didn't mind, deserved it maybe." He paused, the effort of speech taxing him. "Then you came, changed everything." Olivia felt her heart quicken. "Thomas." "I care for you," he continued, each word measured, precious. "More than, as a friend, understand if you don't feel same, your choice, always." The last rays of sunlight gilded his face, highlighting the earnestness in his expression, the vulnerability. Olivia reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "I care for you too," she said softly. "More than as a friend, more than I thought possible when I first came here." His eyes widened with hope and wonder. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, they were both smiling. "Not going to speak poetry," Thomas said wryly, touching his throat, "but feel it." "For you," Olivia laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "I'll speak enough for both of us," she promised. "Though there's something beautiful about your silences, too." That night, as they sat reading in the parlor, their chairs moved imperceptibly closer together. Their hands met occasionally, fingers brushing with deliberate intent. The future stretched before them, unwritten but full of promise. Winter arrived with unusual ferocity that year. Snow was rare in that part of Texas, but a blue norther blew in just before Christmas, bringing freezing temperatures and icy rain that coated everything in a crystalline shell. Thomas and Olivia worked frantically to bring the most vulnerable cattle into the barn, to cover the garden, to stockpile firewood before the worst of the storm hit. On Christmas Eve, with the wind howling outside and ice pellets rattling against the windows, they sat before the fireplace wrapped in quilts, drinking hot cider. Thomas had been using his voice more frequently, though still sparingly, saving his words for when they truly mattered. "Got something for you," he said, reaching beneath his chair and producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "But we agreed no gifts," Olivia protested, though she was secretly pleased. Thomas shrugged, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Couldn't resist." Olivia carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover soft and supple with her initials embossed in gold leaf. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the fine craftsmanship. "For your stories," Thomas explained. "Hear you making them up. When you work, think you should write them down." Olivia blushed. She did indeed compose stories in her head as she went about her chores, tales of brave pioneers and independent women finding their way in the West. She hadn't realized Thomas had noticed. "Thank you," she said, deeply touched. "I have something for you too, actually." She retrieved a package from behind the sofa. "I couldn't resist either." Thomas unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a hand-knit scarf in deep blue wool, and beneath it, a small, hinged wooden box. He opened the box to find a silver pocket watch, obviously antique but polished to a high sheen. "It was my father's," Olivia explained. "One of the few things I managed to keep. I want you to have it." Thomas stared at the watch, visibly moved. "Olivia, this is too precious." "So are you," she replied simply. He looked up at her, his eyes bright with emotion. Setting the gifts aside carefully, he reached for her hands. "Olivia Sutton," he said, his voice stronger than she had ever heard it, as if he'd been practicing these particular words. "I love you." "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, transforming the cozy room into a space of infinite possibility. Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming joy. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hands. "Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Zachary." His kiss was different this time, still gentle but confident, full of promise and passion long restrained. When they broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Never thought I'd find love again," he whispered. "After war, after everything?" "Nor I," Olivia admitted. "After losing my father, my home, I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning." They were married in the spring, when the bluebonnets carpeted the hills and the air was sweet with promise. Sheriff Davis performed the ceremony in San Antonio, with Sarah and her children as witnesses. Thomas spoke his vows clearly, each word deliberate and heartfelt, saving his voice for this most important of declarations. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, husband and wife, Olivia marveled at the journey that had brought her here from the auction block to this moment of perfect happiness. Thomas seemed to read her thoughts, reaching across to take her hand. "Regrets?" he asked simply. "Not one," she replied, squeezing his fingers. "Every step led me to you." Life on the ranch continued much as before, with one significant difference: they shared the master bedroom now, their nights filled with tender discoveries and deepening intimacy. Thomas spoke more frequently in private, though he remained largely silent around others. His words, rare and carefully chosen, became all the more precious to Olivia. In July, Olivia confirmed what she had suspected for weeks: she was expecting a child. Thomas's joy was boundless, expressed more in touch and gesture than in speech, though he did manage to whisper, "Thank you," against her hair as he held her close. They converted the small bedroom, Olivia's first room on the ranch, into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and assembling a cradle that Thomas crafted with his own hands. As Olivia's body changed, Thomas took on more of the household duties, insisting she rest when the Texas heat became too oppressive. Their son, Samuel Thomas Zachary, was born on a clear February morning in 1878, with a neighbor woman serving as midwife. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, and from his first breath he filled the ranch house with the sounds of vibrant life. To Olivia's surprise and delight, Thomas spoke more frequently after Samuel's birth. "Want him to know my voice," he explained as he cradled his son. "Want him to hear words, even if few." "He'll know your voice," Olivia assured him, watching the two with overwhelming love, "and he'll know your heart, which speaks volumes without sound." The years passed in a tapestry of ordinary joys and sorrows. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Samuel grew into a curious, talkative child who seemed to understand instinctively when to fill the silence with chatter and when to embrace the quiet. Olivia's journal filled with stories, some of which found their way into the local newspaper and later into small magazines. In 1881, their daughter Caroline was born, named for the aunt she would never meet but whose spirit lived on in the roses that bloomed by the porch and the books that lined the shelves. Thomas held her with the same wonder he had held Samuel, whispering promises and endearments that cost him pain but which he gave freely, out of love. The bride auction ring was eventually broken up, thanks in part to Sarah's testimony and Sheriff Davis's determination. The scars from that time remained, but they faded, becoming part of a past that had shaped but did not define the present. On the 10th anniversary of the day Thomas had purchased Olivia at the auction, they sat together on the porch swing, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel, now 8, was teaching 5-year-old Caroline how to lasso a fence post, both laughing at their clumsy attempts. "Do you ever think about that day?" Olivia asked, her head resting on Thomas's shoulder. "The auction," Thomas nodded, his arm tightening around her. "Darkest day," he said. "And brightest, end of your freedom, beginning of mine." Olivia looked up at him, questioning. "Was trapped too," he explained. "In silence, in solitude, you freed me." He touched his throat where the scar had faded to a thin white line. "Not just to speak, to live." Olivia kissed him softly. "We freed each other, I think." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Olivia reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her here. From desperate circumstances had come unimaginable joy. From an act of purchase had come true freedom. From silence had come the most eloquent expressions of love. Thomas seemed to read her thoughts, as he so often did. He turned to face her, cupping her cheek with a calloused hand. With deliberate care, he spoke the words that never failed to make her heart soar. "I love you, Olivia Zachary," he said, his voice rough but clear. "Always will." "And I love you," she replied, covering his hand with hers. "Always have, since you first wrote housekeeper on that slate and gave me a choice." Their lips met as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land that was their home. In the yard, their children's laughter rose like music. On the horizon, tomorrow waited, full of promise. And between them, in the space where words sometimes failed but understanding never did, was everything that mattered, a love born in silence, spoken in actions, enduring through all the seasons of their lives together. In 1885, Thomas and Olivia added a new wing to the ranch house, creating a proper study where Olivia could write and a larger bedroom for Samuel, who at 10 was beginning to crave his own space. The ranch had prospered over the years, allowing them these small luxuries along with 2 more horses and an expanded herd of cattle. That summer brought a drought that tested their resilience. Day after day of relentless sun baked the earth, dried up the smaller creeks, and withered the garden despite their best efforts at irrigation. Thomas spent long hours ensuring the cattle had access to water, digging deeper into the main creek when necessary, while Olivia and the children conserved every drop in the household. "Will we be all right?" Caroline asked one evening, her young face serious as she watched her father return from another grueling day, his clothes dusty and his eyes tired. "We will," Olivia assured her, though her own worry was mounting. "The land has been through droughts before, and so have we." Thomas overheard and nodded in agreement. Later that night, as they lay in bed with the windows open, hoping for a breeze that never came, he spoke softly into the darkness, creek still flowing, lower but flowing, enough for now. Olivia curled against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "And if it stops, won't," he said with quiet certainty. "This land provides, always has." His faith proved justified. In late August, clouds finally gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. The first rainfall came at night, gentle at first, then building to a steady downpour that lasted for hours. Olivia and Thomas stood on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the parched earth drink deeply, listening to the music of water on the roof. "You were right," Olivia whispered, leaning into his embrace. "The land provides." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "We endure," he replied simply, "together." The drought broke, and autumn brought a renewed sense of abundance. The children returned to their studies, Samuel showing a particular aptitude for mathematics, Caroline developing her mother's love of literature. In the evenings, the family gathered in the parlor, reading aloud or playing games or simply enjoying each other's company. Thomas still spoke sparingly outside the family circle, but within their home, his voice was a constant, if quiet, presence. He read to Caroline, discussed ranch management with Samuel, and shared his thoughts with Olivia in the privacy of their bedroom. His speech remained somewhat labored, the damage to his throat a permanent legacy of his war imprisonment, but the pain of talking had diminished with practice and time. In December, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch, a Union veteran passing through on his way to California, seeking odd jobs to fund his journey. Thomas hired him to help repair the barn roof, which had developed a leak during the recent rains. The man, who introduced himself as James Miller, worked diligently alongside Thomas for several days. On his last evening, as they sat at the dinner table enjoying Olivia's beef stew, Miller studied Thomas with a puzzled expression. "Forgive me for asking, Mr. Zachary, but were you by chance at Johnson's Island? During the war?" Thomas stiffened almost imperceptibly, then nodded once. Miller set down his fork. "I thought I recognized you. I was a guard there in '64. I remember a prisoner who wouldn't or couldn't speak, even when he stopped, glancing at the children, then continued more carefully. Even when questioned, they thought he was being defiant." The table fell silent. Samuel and Caroline looked at their father with wide eyes, aware that something significant was happening but not understanding its full import. Thomas cleared his throat. "Was there," he confirmed, his voice low. "Confederate cavalry captured at Gettysburg." Miller nodded slowly. "I wasn't directly involved in your questioning, but I was there. I saw what happened." He hesitated, then added with evident difficulty, "I did nothing to stop it. That has weighed on me for many years." Olivia reached for Thomas's hand under the table, feeling the tension in his fingers. After a long moment, Thomas spoke again, each word measured. "War made beasts of men on both sides. Past is past." Miller's eyes filled with tears. "You're a better man than I, Mr. Zachary. Thank you for your grace." He turned to Olivia. "Madam, you have a remarkable husband." "I know," Olivia replied softly, squeezing Thomas's hand. Later, after Miller had retired to the barn loft where he was sleeping and the children had been tucked into bed, Thomas and Olivia sat before the fireplace, the encounter having stirred memories Thomas rarely discussed. "Did you know that man?" Olivia asked gently. "From the prison?" Thomas shook his head. "Many guards, all looked same after a while." He stared into the flames, his expression distant. "They thought I was hiding information. I wasn't, just a lieutenant, knew nothing valuable." Olivia moved closer, resting her head against his shoulder. "Is that when they damaged your throat?" "Yes." Thomas touched the scar reflexively. "Rope, then knife. When rope didn't work, His voice was detached, as if speaking of someone else's suffering. Couldn't talk after, not for years. Didn't want to anyway. Tears slipped silently down Olivia's cheeks as she imagined the horror he had endured. I'm so sorry, my love. Thomas turned to her, his eyes refocusing on the present. He wiped away her tears with a gentle thumb. Don't cry for old wounds, they brought me here to you. Did you mean what you said to Miller about the past being past? Thomas considered the question seriously. Mostly, he finally answered. Hate poisoned me for years, couldn't let it continue, had to let go. He smiled slightly. Caroline helped, then you, then our children. Hard to hate when surrounded by love. Olivia kissed him, pouring into the gesture all the admiration and love she felt for this remarkable man who had endured so much yet retained his capacity for compassion and forgiveness. You are the best of men, Thomas Zachary. No, he disagreed softly. Just lucky. Found you. Miller departed the next morning, heading west with their good wishes and a pack of provisions Olivia had prepared. As they watched him ride away, Samuel asked the question that had clearly been on his mind since dinner the previous night. Pa, what happened to you in the war? Why don't you talk much? Thomas exchanged a glance with Olivia, who nodded encouragingly. He knelt to his son's level, choosing his words with care. Was injured, he explained simply. In my throat, makes talking difficult, sometimes painful. But worth effort, for family. Samuel considered this, then asked, Does it hurt now when you talk to us? Less than before, Thomas assured him. Practice helps, and want to speak to you more than want to avoid pain. The boy nodded, satisfied with this explanation for now, though Olivia knew there would be more questions as he grew older and better understood the complexities of the war and its aftermath. As Christmas approached, the Zachary family prepared for their traditional celebration. They cut a small pine from their own land, decorated it with ornaments they had collected or made over the years, and hung stockings by the fireplace. Olivia baked gingerbread and mince pies, filling the house with spicy, sweet aromas. On Christmas Eve, after the children had finally fallen asleep in anticipation of the morning's festivities, Thomas and Olivia sat wrapped in a quilt on the porch, gazing at the star-filled Texas sky. 12 years, Thomas mused, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Since auction. Olivia nodded, counting back the years of their life together. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times it seems like another lifetime. Never regretted, Thomas said, pulling her closer, spending those $90. Olivia laughed softly. Best investment you ever made, she teased, then grew serious. I think about Sarah sometimes and the other women from the auction. I hope they all found their way to safety and happiness. Sarah did, Thomas reminded her. Last letter said she's teaching school now, children thriving. They had maintained a correspondence with Sarah over the years, watching from a distance as she rebuilt her life after the auction nightmare. Her resilience was a source of inspiration for Olivia, who had included a character based on Sarah in one of her published stories. I've been thinking, Olivia said, turning to face Thomas, about writing the full story, our story, not just for the newspaper or the magazines, but a book, about the auctions, about what happened to those women, about how we found each other through such darkness. Thomas considered this, his expression thoughtful. Important story should be told. He touched her cheek gently. You're the one to tell it. Encouraged by his support, Olivia continued, I would change the names, of course, and some of the details. But the truth of it, the horror of those auctions and the hope that came afterward, I think people should know. They should, Thomas agreed, but be prepared, some won't want to hear, easier to forget ugly truths. I know, Olivia sighed. But if it helps even one woman or prevents another auction, it will be worth it. Thomas kissed her softly. My brave writer, he murmured, always fighting with words. Inside the house, a small sound caught their attention, the creak of a floorboard, followed by a child's giggle quickly hushed. Thomas and Olivia exchanged amused glances. Santa has competition, Thomas whispered, rising to his feet and helping Olivia up. Should check stockings. Sure enough, they found Samuel and Caroline attempting to peek into the parlor, their excitement having overcome their promise to stay in bed until morning. Back to bed, you two, Olivia scolded gently. Santa won't come if you're awake, but we heard something on the roof. Caroline insisted, her eyes wide with genuine belief. At 6 years old, she was still firmly in the realm of magical thinking. Samuel, at 11, was more skeptical but played along for his sister's benefit. "Probably just the wind," he said, taking her hand. "Come on, Caro. Morning will come faster if we're asleep." As they shepherded the children back to bed, Thomas leaned close to Olivia's ear. "Didn't have this," he murmured. "Growing up, magic, love, family." Olivia squeezed his hand, understanding the depth of feeling behind his simple statement. Thomas rarely spoke of his childhood, but she knew it had been harsh, an orphan raised by a distant uncle who viewed children as merely extra hands for labor. "Our children will never doubt they are loved," she promised. Never. After the children were settled, Thomas and Olivia placed the presents under the tree, practical gifts like new boots and books. Along with special treasures they had ordered from the Montgomery Ward catalog months ago. Thomas had crafted wooden toys as well, a doll cradle for Caroline, a set of carved farm animals for Samuel. As they arranged everything just so, Olivia felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. From the auction block to this moment of domestic joy, the journey seemed impossible, yet here they were, surrounded by the life they had built together. "Happy?" Thomas asked, noticing her tears. "Impossibly so," Olivia replied, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes I think my heart might burst with it." Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Know the feeling," he said, leading her toward their bedroom. "Now sleep. Children will wake us at dawn." His prediction proved accurate. The sun had barely crested the horizon when excited footsteps pounded down the hallway, followed by Caroline's ecstatic shriek upon discovering that Santa had indeed visited during the night. The day unfolded in a blur of torn wrapping paper, delicious food, and family games. In the evening, as they sat around the fireplace, Thomas surprised them all by producing a small fiddle from behind the sofa, a gift to himself that he had been practicing in secret during his solitary rides across the ranch. "Can't speak well," he explained to his wide-eyed children. "Thought might let this speak for me sometimes." He positioned the instrument under his chin and drew the bow across the strings. The melody was simple, Silent Night, played slowly and with occasional wrong notes, but the effort and love behind it made it the most beautiful music Olivia had ever heard. Caroline clapped with delight when he finished, and Samuel regarded his father with newfound respect. "Will you teach me, Pa?" The boy asked eagerly. Thomas nodded, pleased. "When your hands grow a bit larger, for now can show basics." As he demonstrated how to hold the bow, Olivia watched her family with a full heart. Their life wasn't perfect. The ranch demanded constant work. Money was sometimes tight, and the shadow of Thomas's war injuries would never fully disappear. But it was a good life, rich with love and purpose, built on the foundation of a choice made 12 years ago on an auction block in San Antonio. Spring of 1886 brought renewal to the Zachary Ranch. The bluebonnets carpeted the hills once more, cattle grazed on fresh grass, and Olivia's garden yielded an abundance of vegetables. It also brought a letter that would change the course of their lives. The letter came from a publisher in New York who had read one of Olivia's stories in a ladies' magazine and was interested in seeing more of her work, particularly if she had anything of book length. Olivia had been secretly working on her novel about the bride auctions for months, rising before dawn to write while the house was quiet. "This is your chance," Thomas told her, his eyes bright with pride as she read the letter aloud. "The book, your story." "Our story," Olivia corrected gently. "And I'm not sure it's ready. It's such a difficult tale to tell. How do I balance the horror of the auctions with the hope that came after?" "Same way you balance everything," Thomas said simply, "with truth and heart." Encouraged by his faith in her, Olivia spent the next weeks revising and polishing her manuscript. The children, now old enough to understand the importance of their mother's work, took on extra chores to give her more time to write. Even Thomas, who normally avoided town whenever possible, made the trip to San Antonio to post the precious package when it was finally ready. Summer passed in a haze of anticipation and normal ranch life. Samuel, approaching 12, began taking on more responsibility with the cattle, showing a natural aptitude for the work. Caroline, at 7, became her mother's shadow in the garden and kitchen, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. In August, another letter arrived. The publisher wanted to publish Olivia's book. The advance wasn't large, but it represented validation of her talent and a chance for her story to reach a wider audience. Thomas insisted on celebrating, arranging for a neighbor to watch the children while he took Olivia to San Antonio for dinner at the Grand Menger Hotel. "To my wife, the author," he toasted, raising his glass of wine across the elegant table. He had worn his best suit for the occasion, and Olivia thought he had never looked more handsome. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied honestly, "not just because it's our story, but because you believed I could tell it." Thomas shook his head slightly. "Always believed in you. From first day, saw your strength, your heart. Even when I was terrified and angry standing on that auction block, especially then," he confirmed. "Fury in your eyes, dignity despite everything." Olivia reached across the table to take his hand. "I was so afraid of you," she admitted. "The silent man who bought me," Thomas smiled ruefully. "Know that now, was afraid too, of failing you, of not being what you needed." They reminisced about those early days, the awkwardness, the gradual building of trust, the slow blossoming of friendship and then love. The memories were bittersweet, shadowed by the injustice that had brought them together, yet illuminated by the joy they had found despite it. As they drove home under a canopy of stars, Olivia rested her head on Thomas's shoulder, content in a way she could never have imagined on that terrible day at the auction. Whatever came of her book's success or failure, she had already achieved what mattered most, a life of purpose and love. The book, titled Purchased, was published in the spring of 1887. Though Olivia had used pseudonyms and altered certain details, anyone who knew them well could recognize their story in the tale of a silent rancher who purchased a woman at auction to save her from a worse fate. The reviews were mixed. Some praised its unflinching look at a dark practice, while others criticized it as too sensationalistic or, conversely, not dramatic enough. But the letters that mattered most came from readers who had experienced similar auctions, or who knew women who had. They wrote to thank Olivia for bringing this hidden injustice to light, for giving voice to experiences many had been too ashamed to speak of. Sheriff Davis wrote to inform them that the book had sparked renewed efforts to investigate remaining auction rings in other counties. The most unexpected letter came from a woman in Philadelphia who had read the book and recognized her brother in the character of the silent rancher. Thomas's sister Caroline, it turned out, had maintained a correspondence with a childhood friend even after moving to Texas. That friend was now married to a lawyer who had helped publish Olivia's book. "Small world," Thomas remarked when Olivia read him the letter. "Caroline would have loved knowing her friend helped tell our story." "She would have loved everything about our life, I think," Olivia said softly, looking out the window to where their Caroline was teaching her doll to ride the wooden rocking horse Thomas had built. "Everything except my silence," Thomas said, a rare moment of self-deprecation. "Always wanted me to speak up more even as children." Olivia turned back to him with a smile. "You speak plenty in all the ways that matter." The success of the book, modest though it was in financial terms, allowed the Zacharys to make some improvements to the ranch. They added a proper bathroom with indoor plumbing, a luxury that thrilled the entire family, and built a small separate office for Olivia's writing. They also set aside money for the children's education, determined that both Samuel and Caroline would have opportunities neither of their parents had enjoyed. Life continued its steady rhythm of work and family, marked by the changing seasons and the children's growth. Samuel's voice deepened, and he shot up in height until he nearly matched his father. Caroline lost her baby teeth and developed a passion for horses that rivaled her brother's. In the fall of 1889, Thomas and Olivia celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary with a picnic by the creek that had sustained them through drought and plenty. At 47, Thomas's hair was more silver than brown now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But he moved with the same fluid strength that had first impressed Olivia. She, at 35, had her own silver threads among the auburn and laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. 13 years, Olivia mused as they sat on a blanket beneath the cottonwood trees. Supposedly an unlucky number, Thomas snorted softly. No such thing as luck, only choices and consequences. Such a pragmatist, she teased, leaning against him. But I suppose you're right. We are where we are because of choices, yours to buy me, mine to stay, ours to build this life together. Best choices, Thomas said simply, kissing her temple. Never doubted. As they shared the meal, Olivia had packed fried chicken, cornbread, apple pie. They discussed the future. Samuel would soon be old enough for advanced schooling if he wanted it, though he seemed content with the ranching life for now. Caroline was showing academic promise that might eventually lead her beyond the boundaries of their land. Want them to have options, Thomas said, not forced paths. Like we were, Olivia asked gently. Thomas considered this, then shook his head. Different. War forced my path. Poverty forced yours. Want them to choose freely. They will, Olivia assured him. They've grown up knowing they're loved, that they have value beyond what they can produce or earn. That makes all the difference. As they packed up their picnic and prepared to return to the house, Thomas paused, gazing out over the land that had been his home for so many years. Been thinking, he said slowly, about expanding neighboring property for sale, Jenkins Place. Olivia looked at him in surprise. The Jenkins Ranch bordered theirs to the west, 300 acres with good water access and excellent grazing land. Can we afford it? With book money and savings would be stretch but doable. Thomas turned to face her. For children's future, more cattle. More options, if you agree. The fact that he would consider such a major purchase only with her full consent still touched Olivia, even after all their years together. So many wives had no say in financial decisions, yet Thomas had always treated her as a true partner. I think it's an excellent idea, she said after considering it carefully. The land is good and the children will need their own places someday. Samuel already talks about having his own herd. Thomas nodded, pleased by her agreement. We'll speak to Jenkins tomorrow. They sealed the decision with a kiss that still held the power to quicken Olivia's pulse and make her feel like the young woman who had first discovered love in this unlikely place with this extraordinary man. The purchase of the Jenkins property marked a new chapter for the Zachary family. The additional land meant more work, but also more prosperity as they increased their herd and expanded their garden. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle, the first time they had employed anyone beyond occasional day laborers. The ranch hands, brothers named Robert and William Tucker, lived in the old Jenkins cabin. They were hardworking and respectful, and Samuel idolized them, absorbing their knowledge of cattle and horses like a sponge. Thomas, who had always managed alone, adjusted to the role of employer with characteristic fairness and quiet authority. Olivia, meanwhile, had begun work on a second book, a novel set during the Civil War, exploring the experiences of women on both sides of the conflict. Her publisher had expressed interest based on the critical success of Purchased, though its sales had been modest. Writing remained a joy for her, a way of making sense of the world through story. As 1890 dawned, bringing a new decade full of possibility, the Zachary family looked toward the future with optimism. The ranch was prosperous, the children were thriving, and Thomas and Olivia's bond remained as strong as ever, deepened by years of shared struggles and joys. None of them could have predicted how quickly their peaceful existence would be threatened. The trouble began in March, when a group of men rode onto their property unannounced. Thomas was checking fence lines with Robert Tucker when he spotted the dust cloud approaching from the east. He sent Robert to alert the house while he rode to meet the visitors. There were 5 of them, well-dressed but hard-eyed, led by a man Thomas recognized with a jolt of dismay, Jacob Blackwell, owner of the largest ranch in the county and a man known for his ruthless business practices. Blackwell had been trying to buy out smaller ranchers for years, consolidating land to build an empire. "Zachary," Blackwell called as they approached. "Fine day for a ride." Thomas nodded curtly but didn't speak. Though he used his voice more freely now with family and trusted friends, he still preferred silence when dealing with strangers or those he distrusted. Blackwell seemed unfazed by Thomas's silence. "I'll get right to the point. I'm interested in acquiring your property, both the original parcel and the Jenkins addition. I'm prepared to make a generous offer." Thomas shook his head once, definitively. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "You haven't heard my price yet." Thomas reached for the small slate he still carried out of habit. On it he wrote, "Not for sale, at any price." "Everything has a price, Zachary," Blackwell said, his genial tone hardening, "and everyone." The implied threat wasn't lost on Thomas. He straightened in his saddle, his hand moving subtly toward the rifle in his scabbard. Behind him, he heard hoofbeats approaching. Robert returning, likely with William. Blackwell noticed too. His smile returned, cold and calculating. "Think about it, I'll be in touch." He tipped his hat and wheeled his horse around, his men following without a word. Thomas watched them ride away, a sense of foreboding settling in his chest. When Robert and William reached him, he wrote briefly on his slate, "Trouble." Then, aloud with effort, "Need to warn Olivia." Back at the house, Olivia listened with growing concern as Thomas explained the encounter. "Blackwell has a reputation," she said, pacing the kitchen. "They say he drove the Hendersons off their land by damming the creek that supplied their water. And the Johnsons mysteriously decided to sell after their barn burned down." Thomas nodded grimly. "Know the stories, never thought he'd come here, too far from his main holdings." "Until we bought the Jenkins place," Olivia realized. "That puts us right on his eastern border." "Strategic," Thomas agreed, "but won't sell. This is our home, children's legacy." Olivia stopped pacing to stand before him, taking his hands in hers. "We'll fight," she promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The threat from Blackwell cast a shadow over the ranch, but life continued. They took precautions. The Tucker brothers began taking turns keeping watch at night, and Thomas made sure everyone knew how to use a firearm. But they refused to live in fear, focusing instead on the daily work of the ranch and family life. In May, they celebrated Caroline's 10th birthday with a small party. The girl was growing into a beauty, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. She had inherited Olivia's love of books and Thomas's quiet determination, along with a natural grace that was entirely her own. "Double digits now," Thomas remarked as they watched her showing her friends the new kitten he had given her. "Growing too fast." "She is," Olivia agreed, a touch of melancholy in her voice. "Samuel too, 15 already, and talking about breeding his own line of horses." "Good plan," Thomas said approvingly. "Boy has eye for horseflesh and head for business." They were interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Davis, who had been invited to the party but appeared more serious than the occasion warranted. He drew Thomas and Olivia aside, his expression grave. "I thought you should know," he said quietly. "Jacob Blackwell has been making inquiries about your property legal status, water rights, even looking into the original auction where you two met." He glanced apologetically at Olivia. "Seems particularly interested in the circumstances of your marriage." Olivia felt a chill run through her. "The auction was illegal," she said. "We've known that from the start." "Yes, but you built a life on it nonetheless," the sheriff pointed out. "Your marriage license lists you as Olivia Sutton, a free woman entering into marriage of her own volition. If someone wanted to make trouble, they might argue that the original sale created a different kind of relationship." Thomas's face hardened. "No one questioning our marriage," he said, his voice rough with emotion. 15 years, 2 children, built together." Sheriff Davis held up a placating hand. "I'm not questioning anything, Thomas. I'm just warning you about what Blackwell might be planning. He's not above using underhanded tactics to get what he wants." After the sheriff left, Thomas and Olivia retreated to their bedroom to discuss the situation privately, away from the birthday festivities. "He's trying to invalidate our life together," Olivia said, anger rising in her like a tide. To use that horrible auction against us after all this time. Thomas pulled her into his arms, his body tense with his own anger. Won't succeed, he promised. Our marriage is real, legal, we'll fight anyone who says different. Olivia clung to him, drawing strength from his certainty. But what if he finds a sympathetic judge? What if he uses your silence against you, makes it seem like I was coerced all these years? Then speak, Thomas said simply. Tell our truth. Like in your book, people listen then, will listen again. His faith in the power of her words bolstered Olivia's courage. Together, they rejoined the party, determined not to let Blackwell's schemes rob them of this joyful day with their daughter, but the threat lingered, casting a pall over the summer months. They heard rumors that Blackwell was buying up notes of debt against neighboring properties, forcing foreclosures. They learned he had hired additional men, not cowhands, but hard-faced strangers who looked more accustomed to guns than cattle. In July, William Tucker rode in from the North Range with troubling news someone had cut their fence line and driven off a dozen head of cattle. Thomas organized a search party, but the stolen cattle had vanished, likely already sold across the state line. August brought drought again, along with a suspicious fire that consumed a storage shed near the barn. Only the quick action of Samuel and the Tucker brothers prevented it from spreading to the main structures. Through it all, Thomas and Olivia presented a united front, refusing to be intimidated. They filed reports with Sheriff Davis about each incident, though they had no proof Blackwell was behind them. They reinforced the ranch house, stockpiled supplies, and made contingency plans for the children's safety if things worsened. Their determination seemed to pay off. By September, the incidents had stopped and life began to return to normal. Perhaps Blackwell had found easier targets, or perhaps he had simply decided the Zachary ranch wasn't worth the effort. Either way, they allowed themselves to hope the worst was over. It was a false hope. In early October, Thomas rode to San Antonio for supplies, taking Samuel with him. Olivia remained at home with Caroline, the Tucker brothers keeping watch over the ranch as usual. The day was bright and cool, perfect for working in the garden, which Olivia and Caroline were doing when the riders appeared. There were 7 of them, led by Jacob Blackwell himself. They rode directly to the house, surrounding it in a move that was clearly meant to intimidate. Olivia straightened, pushing Caroline behind her protectively. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My husband isn't here." "I know," Blackwell replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's rather the point of my visit, Mrs. Zachary." "Or should I say, Miss Sutton?" Olivia felt her blood run cold. "My name is Olivia Zachary. I've been married to Thomas for 15 years. "Have you?" Blackwell dismounted, approaching with a document in his hand. "According to my investigation, you were purchased at an illegal auction in 1876. A transaction that could never lead to a legal marriage, regardless of what paperwork you later filed." "That auction was a travesty," Olivia said fiercely. "Thomas saved me from it. Our marriage is legal and binding." Blackwell's smile widened. "That will be for a judge to decide. In the meantime, I have papers here questioning your legal right to this property. Half of it, at least the half that should belong to Thomas Zachary's legal wife." "I am his legal wife. Are you? The record shows he purchased you. Ownership isn't marriage, Mrs. Zachary." "Or should I call you Thomas Zachary's property?" Olivia felt rage building within her, hot and clarifying. "Get off our land," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Now." Blackwell looked past her to where Robert and William Tucker were approaching, rifles in hand. His expression hardened. "This isn't over. I've filed papers in San Antonio. The court will sort this out." He remounted his horse, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Good day, Miss Sutton. I'll see you in court." As they rode away, Caroline emerged from behind Olivia, her young face pale with fear and confusion. "Mama." "What did that man mean, about you being purchased?" Olivia knelt before her daughter, taking her small hands. "It's a long story, sweetheart, one that your father and I will explain together when he gets home. But what you need to know is that we love each other very much, and we love you and Samuel. We are a family. Nothing that man says can change that." Caroline nodded, though uncertainty still clouded her eyes. Is he going to take our home? No, Olivia said firmly. We won't let him. But as she stood watching Blackwell and his men disappear in the distance, Olivia felt a tremor of doubt. They had built their life on a foundation that, while transformed by love and commitment, had begun with an act of purchase. What if a court saw only that beginning and not the years of partnership that followed? When Thomas and Samuel returned that evening, Olivia pulled Thomas aside to relay what had happened. His face darkened with anger as she spoke, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Been planning this," he said grimly. "Waiting until I was gone, coward." "He said he's filed papers questioning our marriage," Olivia continued, "and by extension my right to co-own the ranch." Thomas shook his head vehemently. "Won't stand. Our marriage is legal, registered in San Antonio. Witnessed." "But it came after the auction," Olivia pointed out, voicing her deepest fear. "What if they rule that invalidates everything?" Thomas took her face in his hands, his blue eyes fierce with conviction. "Listen to me, Olivia Zachary, you are my wife. In the eyes of God, the law, and everyone who knows us, no court can undo 15 years of marriage, no judge can erase our life together." His certainty steadied her, as it always had. They would fight this together as they had faced every challenge since that first day at the auction block. That evening, they sat down with Samuel and Caroline to explain the situation as honestly as they could while respecting the children's ages. Samuel, at 15, was old enough to understand most of it. Caroline, at 10, grasped the essentials that their mother had been in trouble, their father had helped her, and now someone was trying to use that against them. "But that's not fair," Caroline protested. "Mama and Papa love each other. Life isn't always fair, sweetheart," Olivia told her gently. "But we fight for what's right, even when it's difficult." Samuel, who had been listening intently, spoke up with a maturity that made Olivia's heart ache. "What can I do to help?" Thomas placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Be strong," he said simply, "for your sister, for ranch. Truth will prevail." Later, after the children had gone to bed, Thomas and Olivia sat at the kitchen table reviewing the deed to their property and their marriage certificate. Both were in order, registered properly in Bexar County. But they knew that Blackwell had money and influence, and in the hands of an unscrupulous lawyer, even the most straightforward facts could be twisted. "Need to see Sheriff Davis," Thomas decided. "Tomorrow, and lawyer." Olivia nodded agreement. "And I should write to my publisher. The book has given me some platform, however small. Perhaps I can use it to bring attention to what Blackwell is doing, not just to us, but to all the smaller ranchers he's forcing out." Thomas looked at her with pride. "My warrior," he said softly, "fighting with words." "Words are what I have," Olivia replied. "You taught me their power when you chose to speak after years of silence." Thomas drew her into his arms, holding her as if he could protect her from all the world's injustice through sheer will alone. "We'll not lose our home," he promised. "Our life together?" "No," Olivia agreed, drawing strength from his embrace. "We won't." The legal battle that followed tested their resilience in ways they hadn't experienced since those early days of uncertainty. Blackwell's lawyer, a slick-talking man from Austin, filed motions questioning the validity of Thomas and Olivia's marriage based on the circumstances of their meeting. He argued that a relationship that began with a purchase could never evolve into a legitimate marriage, regardless of subsequent formalities. Thomas and Olivia hired a lawyer of their own, Abigail Foster, a rare female attorney who had read Olivia's book and offered her services at a reduced rate. She was brilliant and determined, filing counter-motions and gathering affidavits from everyone who could testify to the authentic nature of the Zacharys' marriage. Sheriff Davis provided a statement confirming that he had known them for 15 years and had never seen a more devoted couple. The minister who had married them testified that they had both entered the union willingly and with full understanding. Even Sarah, now a respected teacher in a town 50 miles away, traveled to San Antonio to provide her own statement about the auctions and how Thomas had helped stop them. The case dragged on through the winter of 1890 and into the spring of 1891. The legal fees strained their finances, forcing them to sell some cattle and postpone planned improvements to the ranch. But they never considered giving up or accepting any of Blackwell's generous offers to purchase their land and end the lawsuit. Through it all, they maintained as normal a life as possible for Samuel and Caroline. The children continued their studies, the ranch work continued, and they still gathered as a family each evening in the parlor to read or play music, or simply enjoy each other's company. But the strain showed in small ways: Thomas's increased silence, Olivia's occasional sleepless nights, Samuel's fierce protectiveness of his sister, Caroline's sudden nightmares. They were a family under siege, holding together through love and determination, but feeling the pressure from all sides. In April, the case finally went before a judge. Thomas and Olivia traveled to San Antonio for the hearing, leaving the children in the care of the Tucker brothers with strict instructions to remain vigilant. The courtroom was intimidating: high ceilings, dark wood, the judge's bench raised like a pulpit. Thomas wore his best suit, his silver-threaded hair neatly combed, his expression stoic. Olivia sat beside him in a blue dress she had made especially for the occasion, her back straight, her hand clasped in his. Blackwell's lawyer presented his case first, painting a lurid picture of the auction where Olivia had been sold like livestock to a man who never even spoke to declare his intentions. He argued that such a beginning tainted everything that followed, rendering the marriage certificate a mere fiction designed to disguise the true nature of their arrangement. Abigail Foster then rose to present their defense. She spoke eloquently about the evolution of their relationship from rescuer and rescued to partners and spouses. She presented the affidavits, the marriage certificate, the deed to the ranch with both their names, and the birth certificates of their children. "Your Honor," she concluded, "the law recognizes that marriage is a contract freely entered into by two consenting adults. The circumstances of how Mr. and Mrs. Zachary met are irrelevant to the legitimacy of the contract they later signed. They have lived as husband and wife for 15 years, raised 2 children together, and built a successful ranch through their joint efforts. To invalidate their marriage now based on an illegal auction that neither of them sanctioned would be a gross miscarriage of justice." The judge, a stern-faced man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, asked several penetrating questions of both lawyers. Then he turned to Thomas and Olivia themselves. "I'd like to hear from the parties directly," he said. "Mrs. Zachary, would you please tell the court, in your own words, the nature of your relationship with Thomas Zachary?" Olivia stood, her heart pounding but her voice clear. "Thomas Zachary is my husband, Your Honor. He has been for 15 years. The auction where we met was a terrible thing, but what followed was a choice his to offer me freedom, mine to stay and build a life with him. We were legally married in the eyes of the law, but more importantly, we have been partners in every sense of the word. He is the father of my children, the center of my home, the love of my life." The judge nodded, then turned to Thomas. "Mr. Zachary, I understand you have difficulty speaking due to a war injury. If you prefer, you may write your response." Thomas slowly rose to his feet. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was rough but distinct, carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Olivia is my wife," he said simply. "Not property, never property, partner, equal, better than me in many ways." He paused, gathering strength, then continued. "Auction was wrong. Buying her was only way to help, gave her choice after. She chose to stay, chose to marry. I have honored that choice every day since." The courtroom was silent as he finished, the effort of his speech evident in the sheen of sweat on his brow. Olivia reached for his hand, tears in her eyes at the gift he had given using his painful voice to defend their marriage. The judge studied them both for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll take this matter under advisement. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, when I will deliver my ruling." That night, in a small hotel room in San Antonio, Thomas and Olivia held each other close, too anxious to sleep but finding comfort in each other's presence. "Whatever happens," Olivia whispered in the darkness, "we are husband and wife. No judge can change that. No, Thomas agreed softly. Some things beyond courts, beyond laws. Next morning, they returned to the courtroom hand in hand. Blackwell sat in the front row, looking smugly confident. Their lawyer, Abigail Foster, met them with a reassuring smile, though the worry in her eyes betrayed her uncertainty about the outcome. The judge entered, and everyone rose. After the formalities, he cleared his throat and delivered his ruling. Having reviewed the evidence and heard testimony from all parties, I find that the marriage between Thomas and Olivia Zachary is legal and valid under the laws of the state of Texas. While the circumstances of their initial meeting were irregular and potentially illegal, their subsequent actions, including a formal marriage ceremony, joint property ownership, and the establishment of a family, clearly demonstrate a legitimate marital relationship entered into freely by both parties. Olivia felt light-headed with relief. Thomas's hand tightened around hers, his body relaxing beside her for the first time in months. The judge continued, his tone hardening as he addressed Blackwell directly. Furthermore, I find this lawsuit to be vexatious and designed primarily to harass the defendants with the ultimate goal of forcing them to sell their property. The court strongly disapproves of such tactics. Mr. Blackwell, you and your associates are hereby ordered to cease all efforts to dispute the Zacharys' ownership of their ranch. You will also pay all court costs associated with this case. Blackwell's face darkened with anger, but he remained silent as the judge concluded the proceedings. As he stalked from the courtroom, he passed close to Thomas and Olivia. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. "There are other ways to get what I want," but his threat fell empty in the wake of their victory. Thomas and Olivia embraced their lawyer, thanking her profusely for her skilled defense. Then they hurried to the telegraph office to send word to the children that all was well and they would be home the following day. As they rode back to the ranch, the Texas landscape unfurled before them in all its rugged beauty. The land that had been their home for 15 years through drought and plenty, joy and sorrow remained theirs. The life they had built together was validated, not just in their own hearts but in the eyes of the law. "We won," Olivia said softly as the familiar outlines of their ranch appeared on the horizon. Thomas nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. "Never doubted," he replied, though they both knew it for a gentle lie. They had feared, they had worried, but they had never stopped fighting. When they rode into the yard, Samuel and Caroline burst from the house, running to meet them with jubilant cries. The Tucker brothers followed at a more sedate pace, but their grins were just as wide. That night they celebrated with a special dinner, followed by music. Thomas on his fiddle, which he had mastered surprisingly well over the years, Samuel on a harmonica, and Olivia and Caroline singing. It was a moment of pure family joy, all the sweeter for the shadow that had been lifted from them. Later, as they prepared for bed, Thomas drew Olivia into his arms, his expression serious despite their victory. "Blackwell made threat," he said quietly. "Need to remain vigilant." "I know," Olivia sighed. "But for tonight, let's just be grateful. We fought for our home and our marriage, and we won." Thomas smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Yes," he agreed, kissing her softly. "We won." In the years that followed, the Zachary family continued to thrive. The legal victory over Blackwell seemed to break his power in the county. Other ranchers, emboldened by the Zachary's success, began to resist his pressure tactics. Eventually, he sold his holdings and moved east, defeated not by force but by the determined resistance of people fighting for their homes. Samuel, at 18, began managing his own small herd on the western portion of their expanded property. He had his father's gift with animals and his mother's quick intelligence, making him a natural rancher. Caroline, at 13, was showing a talent for writing that rivaled her mother's, filling notebooks with stories and poems that revealed a keen eye for detail and a compassionate heart. Thomas and Olivia watched their children grow with pride and a touch of wistfulness. The years seemed to pass more quickly now, each season bringing new changes, new challenges, new joys. They had weathered the worst storms together, both literal and figurative, and emerged stronger for it. On the 20th anniversary of the day Thomas had purchased Olivia at the auction, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas spoke more freely now, the years of practice having made speech less painful, though he would always be a man of few carefully chosen words. 20 years, he mused, his arm around Olivia's waist. Best purchase I ever made. Olivia laughed, leaning into his embrace. The only human being you ever bought, I should hope. First and last, Thomas agreed with a smile. Wouldn't change anything, not one day, nor would I, Olivia said softly. Every step led us here to this life, these children, this love. She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting the golden light. I was sold to a man who never spoke, but I heard everything I needed to in your silence. Thomas kissed her then, with all the tenderness and passion of their years together. When they parted, he spoke the words that never failed to fill her heart with joy, no matter how many times she heard them. I love you, Olivia Zachary, more each day. And in the gathering twilight, on the land they had fought for and the home they had built, their love born in the unlikeliest of circumstances, tested by hardship and prejudice, strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect, continued to flourish, a testament to the enduring power of choice, courage, and abiding devotion.